This has to be my favorite moment in all of comics. Hello everybody and welcome to another creator-owned video. My name's Robbie and today we're going to be talking about It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth by Zoe Thorogood. Before we get into the video, this material does include discussion and depictions of thoughts of self-harm and where self-harm leads. So this could be sensitive material for some of you. You have been warned. If this is a trigger, if this could be distressing, please only continue the video at your own behest. This is a book that I kind of thought about if I would cover or not, and not just for the sensitive nature of it, but because I know that the author is very self-aware and cites her issues with being able to be perceived and knowing that people are looking at her work and critiquing it and judging it. I felt guilty about adding to that discourse. But the reason I'm going to cover it is because, truthfully, it has become one of my favorite graphic novels, point blank, period. It has very valuable lessons, not just in life, but as an aspiring comic book creator, I think there's a lot that one could observe and learn from Zoe's story. And not only that, but the understanding of and just the application of comic book art and storytelling and using the conventions of comic books is so interesting and so compelling. I just had to cover it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, I'm not going to do this with the whole book, but I do think the first chapter has a lot of great setup and really shows Zoe's stylings off very well. I was reading this book in tandem with Understanding Comics, which was not my intention, but it was really interesting because if you give that book a read at all ever, it really dissects just how a comic works, and Zoe's craft is very interesting. So this first page, the introduction, is about, if this were a movie, this would be the introduction of their protagonist. She'd have dialogue straddling the line between annoying and charming, ironically written by a team of Hollywood writers, etc. And then just sets up, but this isn't a movie, and quickly escalates downward. And I've been considering stabbing myself in the neck with a sharp knife. Just crazy, how this hits you with the severity of the mental state that Zoe is in at this time. And this book is I think the reason it was received so well is poignantly and nakedly transparent about just the way she feels about things. It comes up a lot, but people are relatable. So this is just such a wild way to kick off a story because it's, no pun intended, but very to the point. This character is a recurring character and is the characterization of her dark thoughts and tendencies, if for lack of the more explicit word. So I think this character is just known as happy, but they will show up anytime those thoughts are being discussed, which I think is kind of interesting to show that it's this looming shadow of death, figuratively and perhaps literally. So she says, I don't want to do it because he left me. I want to because I understand why he did. We're getting a view into her life. It's messy artists, typical dwelling. This is a really important breadcrumb here. The question on the screen, why can't you be happy? Zoe's working, she's intentionally without color. Without too much exposition, we get the idea that she's drinking, she's not taking care of herself. She's kind of drowning and, wallowing in her sorrows. She's outlining the idea of this next project she will do, and so she has the the title and the, you know, the front cover kind of mocked up. And now we're seeing her creative process and just like all the ideas going on in her brain, just like it's like jazz, just this like explosion of like color and creativity. We get this sequence here, which is kind of like just like a traditional comic strip. This, I guess, is like how we'll get to this, but this is sort of like how Zoe sees herself. But I just find this entire sequence kind of funny, where she goes to the window and looks outside and asks if God is there and says like, this would be a really convenient time to smite me down. Has this look on her face of satisfaction, like like maybe it will happen, and like like the displeasure that God had his chance and didn't take it, and then we have happy looming here. This is just a story in one page, which is like always a good characteristic, you know, a good trait of any storyteller. So that's where I said like this book isn't just a straightforward narrative, right? There are these moments that just like interject, basically like comic strips, just for like the sake of the storytelling and the world building. But I do think this page really shows off like, you know, her ability to tell a story, and also I just really enjoy her command of expressions, and her comedic pacing. Again, I am not trying to make light of the dark, very real, very serious thoughts being experienced here, but I really do appreciate her way to tackle this with humor, and just be kind of realistic about how it affects her. This page just mentions that maybe it felt like a performance, and I think a lot of people like deal with that or get accused of that, and so it's just like something worth noting that these are very real emotions that people live with. I do not understand what it is like to this extent, you know, but I empathize. So then we get to this kind of like the real introduction here of the purpose of the book. And Zoe introduces that she's a cartoonist. She thought that, you know, she was going to unalive herself. And, you know, she claimed, you know, she confesses like she really was scared that she would do it this time around. And basically sets up that this book is going to be like sort of her challenge to herself to like do this next project. I'll get my story done. At the end of it, I will be happy. And if I'm not happy, then we will take the alternative way out, is kind of like the internal struggle she's dealing with. There's this like fourth wall break where we're kind of seeing like her inner thoughts, if you will. And so there's just a little more setup of how like Zoe's going to treat this as like a real project and a story that has character development and plot. There's Zoe today, a worm, and future cool Zoe. And I really appreciate this page because it just shows there's a lot of like details that, you know, give us a glimpse into her life and her as a character. And again, she's like doing this interesting thing where she is treating like her real human life as like this story and as kind of this cartoony thing where it's like, oh, I have character development. It's like, but you're a person, you know. But she does that gracefully. These characters, again, we're sort of like in Zoe's head, and so like this is actual Zoe, the human and artist. This is how Zoe draws herself like objectively. This is, I think, like basically how Zoe feels like when she draws herself a little more depressed or loose or just like unenthused. That's like the downer, bringing things back into reality Zoe. There is the ideal Zoe, the cartoon character worthy of, being on television and lunch boxes. Like, the optimistic, like, this is who I could be at the end of this. And then there's this character, the gray, like the white gray blob, that I think is just how Zoe shows like herself, I think. It's not a very flattering rendition, but she chooses to use this character in place of herself, I think mostly during her depression. So again, just really interesting how this is a real story, but we're choosing to characterize it like in this way that's very, candid, and like brings out her real thoughts in this storytelling ability. We trace back to like the beginning of her, like where depression became a part of her life. And so there's this another like mini tale where she's in a therapist's office. I assume she's scribbling on the "How are you feeling today" chart, drawing like an anime character. Her young self is charmingly drawn, like just nerdy young Zoe. And then of course the specter of her depression is there. This is an interesting sequence because it starts with "How are you feeling today, Zoe?" and you see the rating chart, and she goes, "I said I want to die." And like there's just this like pause, and then like, "Would you say that's the most sad face?" Like, I do find the humor in this where it's just like so absurd, partially because like someone this young shouldn't have to be dealing with this, but like also like how ill-equipped this person is for for something like this. Again, just the facial expressions in this book are certainly something else. From there, Zoe starts to really get into the tale of her life, and again, like during, like, it's like it is without color. Like she just like, she depicts herself as this like depressed, like gray blob of a character, because that's how she feels. For whatever reason, the other human characters are typically depicted as animals. I think that's perhaps just a kindness to the real people in her life, to like not not show them explicitly. We have this sequence here where she's discussing how she can be perceived and like how that affects her. I just really appreciate the sort of flexibility of the art style and the way she uses, again, all these like mini comics in between to help us understand the way she thinks and feels in these moments. And right here, essentially too, she mentions that to her, art is just like unbound creative expression, that like connecting her, using art to connect her thoughts and feelings with an audience. And she has great artistic talent and like really a lot of ability to change up her styles in such an interesting way. And I appreciate the way she chooses to incorporate this into a story that ultimately, is very mature and, ironically, a very mature story at the end of the day that really understands everything this artist is going through. I mean, most artists that someday have their self-doubt, their imposter syndrome, but again, I just found this book so charming because of the way it was able to incorporate so much different style and technique into a very real, unfiltered expression of her life and like what makes Zoe who she is. Another strong example of this, again, just like using multimedia, is like, here's the part in her story where the pandemic occurs and she's like not going to go to America this year, and the opportunities in front of her at this very young age. She's 23 years old, so this could be a very, for anyone, this is an isolating time in their life, you know, where you're figuring things out. You're just on the cusp of like the success you've been chasing your whole life, and then it's just like ripped away from you. So she kind of shows like the record scratch, if you will, of like the script stopping, the screen going blank, and then like cracking, and then like she says, the void was here and it was beautiful. Like her world is coming apart at this point, figuratively and literally. And you know, the characters she's introduced are here like as things are falling apart. She's sort of being like tempted by these feelings that are engulfing her. This panel in particular is very haunting because it just is like there's so much like satisfaction in the character's expression here of just like, you know, you always have this. Like I again, I can't even imagine what it feels like to deal with these issues at the severity that Zoe has gone through. But I do appreciate her candidness in sharing it and doing it in a way that can like really articulate what this like kind of feels like. And it's, you know, it's very complicated stuff. Like it's I'm obviously happy that she figured out, you know, a way to be happy, but it's, I don't know, I commend her for being able to discuss it so transparently and you know, give people a valuable piece of work that, you know, showcases her own journey of getting through that. This was just like another thing I appreciated. Like one of the conventions that comics offers is like being able to show how when she's dealing with her depression, like there's sort of this like alert meter above her parents' heads, and like if it gets too high, they'll know like something's wrong with her. And then, you know, ultimately, we get this moment where we see that her mother also, like, this is something that runs in the family. I really appreciate this panel that shows like her as like a young innocent child, like in her Princess Peach with her lightsaber, but with the shadow of like what will develop. Just really beautiful artwork. And so we have a sequence where people are comparing her to Billie Scott, and I think I mentioned earlier in the video, like Billie is a representation of Zoe, but is like the ideal of like the story that she would like herself to have, you know? And so that's like an interesting thing we see demonstrated here, is like where the lines sort of get blurred of like who is Billie and who is Zoe. She acknowledges, you know, that with comics she's able to do basically whatever she wants to tell a story, and like again is like going to leverage as much of that as possible. There's basically a part where we like reintroduce the story like all together. This sequence is just hilarious, like just talking about how nerdy she is and like the things she does to isolate herself. And this poignant and thought-provoking, Image Comics 2022. Like, this is like where the imposter syndrome creeps in. If you've ever read The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist by Adrian Tomine, I'm so sorry, Adrian. I know this is like the the issue of your life. My last name's hard to pronounce too. Zoe's like 23 years old, and people refer to her as like the future of comics, and she, you know, acknowledged this poignant and thought-provoking in this scene where she's taking a piss while her friend is passed out on the bathroom floor. But these are, you know, the real life moments that make our lives interesting. And I appreciate that nod to it where she's like, I don't feel, perhaps like she doesn't feel like she deserves that credit, but like everything she's doing and exploring in the world of comics justifies that moniker she was given. And in Adrian Tomine's book, people call him like the the Wonder Boy of mini comics, and so that's just like a common theme here. I really I appreciated the gag nonetheless. Near the end of the book, she has this great gag where she's like, "Would the future of comics do this?" And like, I just think that it's funny that she's challenging those those assumptions of people. Really, again, like it's so hard to summarize everything that happens in this book because it turns on a dime. I would really recommend that you experience it and read it for yourself. I won't take away the experience of reading this sequence, but it's basically nothing short of an actual miracle, if such a thing can exist. And then, last but not least, before we go, I would like to draw attention to my favorite just one of my favorite comic sequences I think I've ever read, which is this this moment where Zoe is apparently displaying as a frog avatar in a VR chat room, and there's a guy as Ugandan Knuckles telling his story of how at 14 he got his girlfriend pregnant and they had a kid and it changed his life. And it's like Zoe takes off her VR headset just like without saying anything, and from one view I think it's like the matter of this is so messed up, I'm not like I can't even touch it, but actually it's shortly followed by the realization, if you will, that again Zoe is like faced with her depression and Happy the character, and he acknowledges like, you're not happy because you don't want to be. Ultimately, happiness, like, this is tough to say. Like, everyone has their own circumstances in life, but happiness isn't just the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Happiness is not having your first published book or your second published book. It's not necessarily even being able to sustain yourself with a career in comics, like, which is going to be a challenging thing. Happiness is a state of mind. This is something I had to apply in my own life and choose to be happy. And that's like where the realization comes in. It's like Zoe is like, if I want to be happy, I have to choose to be happy. And sure, there might be a counter argument there that there's a lot of other things that go into that, but I think it's a very helpful message and a true message. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's lonely at the center of the earth, despite the intense subject matter and the just crazy off the wall humor. Very thoughtful, very helpful, both in terms of understanding oneself, understanding a journey in the comic book industry, and just understanding comics and the way they're made. I really hope that you will consider picking this book up. I hope I didn't spoil too much about the experience, but I've enjoyed reading it so much. I'm very likely to read it again after this because there's just something about it. I would really liken it to, again, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist. Amazing autobiographic short stories from Adrian Tomine. Sorry, man. And then there's kind of an element of like Scott Pilgrim in here too. I don't know, just that's sort of like absurd, wacky humor, which is also one of my favorite books. So like naturally, this really fell into something that I really enjoyed, and I'm likely to read again and again. That's all for today, you guys. I hope I got this right. It's a dense topic, and it was definitely hard to, a little hard to tackle this in a way that would be, you know, thoughtful and helpful, and like hopefully not get any of the details wrong. But I really, again, hope you'll pick up this book and check it out. I hope it helps you in your own journey and can be a useful resource, and you know, whatever you need from it, I think it's in there. As always, I'm really enjoying doing these videos and you know, connecting with you all on the channel. If you have any ideas for a future video or a comic book I should check out, please let me know in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would really appreciate it if you stick around. We recently passed 500 subscribers, an amazing milestone. So I thank you all for being here. So that's all I have for you today, and we'll catch you all in the next video. Take care.